in the Word today. Glad you are watching this and wanting to get into God's Word. Looking at Matthew chapter 5 as we continue on the Sermon on the Mount. We're talking about murder. Is murder on your mind? Probably not. Well, I guess unless you're hunting. In a sense, that's murder, or it's dinner, one of the two. Jesus, though, talks about murder here in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, at first glance, you look at the Sermon on the Mount and you think, well, that has nothing to do with my life. I don't need to be worried about that. Have you ever thought about someone calling them, or have you called someone a fool before? Probably. So, see, a lot of people look at the Sermon on the Mount and they say it's just these little nuggets of truth, and they miss the continuity of the whole thing. So in Matthew chapter 5, for this to make sense, you really have to, I should put it on there, you really got to go back to chapter 5, or in 5, but verse 20 that we covered last time. And in 5:20, Jesus says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Of course, everyone panics. I can never be good enough, and I can never be holy enough, and diligent in my devotional time and my this and that, and that's the point. You can't. That's why, of course, you always need the cross. You need the gospel to save you. But this is now Jesus' point through the next, really to the end of chapter 5, is you can't be good enough by yourself. You need the gospel. So that's on one hand. And then on the other hand, it's not just about the actions like the Pharisees. Remember, unless your righteousness exceeds the Pharisees or the scribes in verse 20, which is impossible, okay? It's not just the actions, though. It's all about the heart. That's what's going on in this entire section of the Sermon on the Mount. Is Jesus is saying, hey, it's not about your actions. This is all going to be about your heart. In the same way, it's not about you being good enough. It's all about the cross. In the same way, it's not about your actions alone. It's about your heart. And so he goes through 6 different contrasts. This is just the first of which, where Jesus is contrasting how the scribes view the law compared to what Jesus is saying what obedience really looks like. So it's not just about the outward actions over here, it's about the heart over here. Okay? So murder is where he starts here in 21. Jesus starts, he says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, not to old people, but it's been said for a long time, as in Moses, you shall not murder. It's the 6th commandment, if I recall correctly. So Jesus is concerned, his point here is not necessarily just about murder, but murderous attitudes. You may say, well, I've never murdered anyone. Well, how is your attitude relative towards other people, in your family, your neighbors, people at work? How is your attitude towards them? It says, you have heard it said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. So we get that. The scribes get that. They're like, okay, I'm good here, no problems, except Jesus takes it the next step because he's really talking about the heart. He says, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. Okay, so you see that, again, Jesus is more concerned about our heart in this than our actual murdering people. Of course, that would be wrong too, but he takes a step further to this murderous attitudes. And he almost has this layering effect, this descending and intensifying kind of statement here. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. So even if you're just angry, you're going to be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council. Whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. So you see these connection points, and then judgment and liable to council. Okay, so you see the connection points of, while yes, we should not murder, murder is not the only issue here. It's our attitudes. It's the heart, this great heart behind our actions that Jesus cares about. Now he gives example to this, two different examples. We'll probably just look at one, so I'll make this too long. But they're basically the same example. And so he says, so if, okay, so that means example. Example number 1, 2 is the next verse there in 25. So for example, you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you. Leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. What's he getting at? Again, it's not about the actions alone. Not actions, but heart. So he's saying your offering, for example, this offering here is an act of worship. You know, when you are giving to the Lord in church and the ushers are passing the plates or however they do it at your church, that's an act of worship. It's not just about paying the light bill for the church. It's an act of worship. And so in that way, it says, if you are offering your gift, if you're worshiping there, you're about to worship God in this moment, and there you remember that you have disobeyed God, and your brother has something against you, he says, stop. Stop. It's not all about actions. It's about the heart here. So stop, go, and first be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift, which is your offering. See, now, our natural tendency is just to want to skip past, our heart problem here and just go to the action, right? It's just a lot easier to do that. In fact, there is a great line, D.A. Carson says, forget the worship service and be reconciled to your brother, I'm quoting this, and only then worship God. And here's his great sentence. He says, men love to substitute ceremony, that's here, loves to substitute ceremony for integrity, purity, and love. That's that humility part down here. But Jesus will have none of it. Basically, D.A. Carson is saying, we would love to just forget about the heart issues and we'll just give a gift, and maybe we'll give an extra $100 because we know we screwed up and therefore God must love me better. Well, you're totally not knowing who the heart of God is. That's not the case. God cares about your heart a whole lot more than he cares about your gift. And then he gives a second example as well, but here you have in this Sermon on the Mount the first of 6 of these examples, different ways of life, of how this is applicable, of how the scribes think it's one way. The scribes think it's going to be about murder, and it's about adultery, and it's about all these different things. But Jesus said, hey, it is so much more about your heart than it is just about your actions alone. And so hopefully in the coming sessions, you'll see this Sermon on the Mount not just this random collection of statements that Jesus said, but there is such continuity all about your heart. We'll talk next time.